10 minutes before the chaos reached Anderson Bob's home, it had already found his son. "Sir, I just got a call. Smith Group and Vile Group are pulling out their investments. Our stock is going down." "What should we do?" asked Donald's assistant, Phil. Donald sighed and buried his face in his hands. "It's over. It's really over. How do I face Father now? He will kill me." As he was speaking, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and saw the name, Anderson Bob. He summoned his courage and picked up. "Donald." His father's voice was cold and direct. "Come home. Now." The line went dead. 10 minutes earlier, in the Anderson Bob family home, Sylvia Bob had walked into her father's study with fire in her eyes. Sylvia was Anderson's eldest child and a senior figure in the Bob Group sales department. She stood before her father and did not soften her words. "Father, have you heard? Our partners are pulling out." She folded her arms. "You knew Donald doesn't have the leadership skills to take this company to the next level. Yet you gave him the position because he is a male child. Look at what has happened. Barely 2 years since you retired, and I have been quietly cleaning up after his mess every single day. Is your pride really worth more than the hard work and resources you have invested in this company?" Anderson stared at her in silence. She was making sense. His obsession with producing a male heir had clouded his judgment, and now they were all paying the price. Larger companies had already been calling him, offering to buy the Bob Group cheaply, and if things continued this way, the company would not survive more than 2 months before it folded completely. "What can we do now?" he asked quietly. "Let me take over," Sylvia said without hesitation. "Give me 3 months. I believe I can restore this company. If I fail, you can do whatever you want with it." Anderson was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. 3 months, he said. He reached for his phone and dialed Donald's number. Donald walked into his father's study and immediately noticed his elder sister Sylvia seated beside Anderson. A stack of documents sat on the table between them. He knelt down slowly. "Father, I am sorry. I failed you." Anderson studied his son and decided to give him a chance to redeem himself. "What is the way forward, Donald? How do we bounce back?" Donald opened his mouth, but no clear answer came. He stumbled over vague ideas and half-formed thoughts, and the longer he spoke, the more obvious it became that he had no real plan. Anderson raised his hand to stop him. "Effective immediately, you are stepping down as CEO. Your sister will take over on a temporary basis for 3 months. If she succeeds, she will become the permanent CEO of this company." "Dad!" Donald shot to his feet. "What are you saying? You promised the company was mine." "Donald." Anderson's voice carried a quiet finality. "I need some rest. Do as I say." He rose from his chair, walked into his bedroom, and closed the door behind him. Donald turned and looked at Sylvia, his jaw tight. "I don't know what deal you made with Father," he said, "but I will not let you take what is mine." Sylvia looked at him calmly and then smiled. "Who says it is only yours? We both own this company. I am protecting it for the both of us." She said her piece, turned, and walked out, leaving him standing alone in the room. Donald stood in the silence of his father's study for a long time after she left. His hands were clasped behind his back, his jaw working slowly. He was not finished. Not by a long way. The following morning, Sylvia arrived at the office before most of the staff. She immediately called an emergency stakeholders meeting, and they discussed at length before it adjourned. After that, she summoned the heads of every department one by one and met with each of them individually. Then she sat at her desk and got to work. She moved quietly and methodically. First, she stabilized the company's cash flow, stopping the bleeding before it became fatal. Next, She audited operations discreetly, identifying and sealing internal leaks before they could grow further. She dropped failing product lines without fanfare and doubled down on the company's most profitable niche. She controlled the flow of information carefully so that panic would not spread internally or externally. She improved revenue without noise. And finally, she reached out to trusted colleagues from her university days, seasoned experts, and brought them in discreetly to support her. Within 2 months, the company began to find its footing again. Sales climbed gradually but steadily. The numbers were moving in the right direction, but something was still missing. Sylvia knew that to fully restore the Bob Group, she needed a strong partnership. The problem was that no serious investor wanted to board what the market still perceived as a sinking ship. Every contact she reached out to either wanted to exploit her situation or simply did not believe in her. Then Phil, her assistant, pulled her aside one afternoon. "There is something you should know," he said. "Our major former partner, Mr. Brian Edward, stopped cooperating with us because of a personal matter. Donald slept with Mr. Brian's fiancée, and when Mr. Brian found out, he cut all ties with the company." Phil paused, "And I believe he pulled strings. That is why no one else wants to partner with us either. If you can arrange a meeting with Mr. Brian, things could change." Sylvia sat back in her chair. She had worked so hard, rebuilt so much, and yet the company had been quietly blacklisted because of a betrayal she had no part in. She made up her mind. She would find Brian Edward, whatever it took. What Sylvia did not know was that her brother had not been idle. 3 weeks into her tenure, Donald had begun making quiet phone calls. He still had relationships inside the company. Loyalists who owed him favors, department heads who had benefited from his years at the top and were uncertain about the new order. He used every one of those relationships carefully. He started small. A logistics report was delayed, causing a shipment to miss its window and drawing a penalty from a client. An internal memo about a new product strategy was leaked to a competitor before Sylvia could execute it. A rumor began circulating among mid-level staff that the 3-month window was a formality, that the company was already being sold and redundancies were coming. Productivity dipped. 2 strong performers from the marketing team submitted their resignations in the same week. Sylvia noticed. She was too sharp not to. She called Phil into her office and closed the door. "Someone inside this building is working against us," she said. "I want to know who is talking to whom, and I want the information trail on that logistics delay." Quietly, no announcements, Phil nodded and got to work. Within days, the threads began to unravel. The leaked memo had passed through a channel that connected directly to Donald's former personal assistant, a man named Kofi, who still occupied a middle management role in operations. Kofi had not acted alone. He had coordinated with 2 others, both of whom reported informally to Donald. Sylvia did not confront Donald directly. Instead, she called Kofi into her office one morning, laid the evidence on the table in front of him without a word, and waited. Kofi resigned before the end of the day. His 2 associates followed. Then Sylvia restructured the reporting lines across 3 departments, replacing the gaps with people she had brought in personally. She did it efficiently and without drama, and she never once mentioned Donald's name publicly in connection with any of it. But privately, that evening, she sat alone in her office long after the building had emptied and allowed herself one moment of cold fury. Her own brother. While she was fighting to save something that belonged to both of them, he had been tumbling beneath her feet. She put the anger away. There was still too much work to do. Donald, for his part, received a brief message from Sylvia that same night. It contained no accusations, no threats. It said only, "Asterisk I know." Do not try again, asterisk. He did not respond. But he did not try again. Every meeting request Sylvia sent to Brian Edward, CEO of Zenith Group, was declined. He was a notoriously private man who rarely attended public events, and his schedule was always shielded from the outside world. Sylvia was running out of time. She had just 1 month left. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. She positioned herself a short distance from the Zenith Group offices and waited for the receptionist, a young woman named Grace, to finish her shift. When Grace stepped out that evening, Sylvia approached her, spoke kindly, and offered a generous tip. All she asked, she explained, was to know her boss's upcoming travel plans. For days later, Grace called. Mr. Brian is traveling on a business trip to YX country this afternoon. His flight is at 2 o'clock. Sylvia moved immediately. She booked a business class seat on the same flight, called her home assistant to pack her luggage, and was at the airport with time to spare. At 2 o'clock, Sylvia was seated in the business class cabin when Brian Edward boarded the aircraft. She recognized him immediately from the photographs she had studied. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and extraordinarily handsome, with a quiet, cold energy that seemed to keep the world at a careful distance. He sat down without acknowledging anyone around him. Sylvia had come prepared. In her hands was a copy of his favorite magazine, a brand new release that had only hit shelves at 1:30 that afternoon. She had sent someone to secure a copy the moment she learned it was coming out, and she opened it now and began to read. From the corner of his eye, Brian noticed the magazine. He had wanted to read that issue, but he said nothing. 7 hours later, the plane landed and both of them checked into the same 5-star hotel. Their rooms were directly across the corridor from each other. For 2 days, no real opportunity presented itself. On the third evening, Sylvia spotted Brian sitting alone beside the hotel pool. It was night. The water was lit from beneath, and he was reading the same magazine she had carried on the plane. She walked over to him. "Hello," she said. He glanced up at her, gave a brief nod, and returned to the page. Sylvia felt the sting of embarrassment, but refused to retreat. She sat down beside him and calmly took out her phone, giving him his space, not crowding him, simply being present. Brian noticed her. He had always despised clingy women. Ever since the day he had discovered his fiancée Melody making out with another man, he had closed himself off entirely. He had been celibate for 6 months. He wanted nothing to do with women. Yet this one sat beside him in comfortable silence and made no demands of him. That, somehow, unsettled him more than anything else could have. After 30 minutes, Sylvia turned slightly. "Mr. Brian, my name is Sylvia Bob, and I represent." Brian stood up abruptly and walked toward his suite. Sylvia followed without thinking. What Sylvia did not know was that she was not the only person who had tracked Brian to YX country. Melody had followed him too. Having failed in every previous attempt to beg Brian's forgiveness, Melody had devised a more calculated approach. She had gained access to Brian's suite earlier that day and placed an aphrodisiac candle on the bedside table, letting it burn slowly, filling the room with its invisible influence. Then she had gone back down to the poolside, intending to lure Brian upstairs herself, only to discover that he had already gone inside with another woman. Melody stood at the edge of the pool and watched the door close. Her carefully laid plan had snapped shut on the wrong person. Sylvia, following close behind Brian, pressed her foot against the door to stop it from closing. She opened her mouth to say everything she had rehearsed. But the moment the door swung open, something shifted inside her. The scent in the room was subtle but warm, threading through her senses before she could identify what it was. Brian had already inhaled it deeply. The heat rose through him against his will. He turned and saw her standing in the doorway. What followed was not planned by either of them. Sylvia woke first. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and then the full weight of what had happened came down on her all at once. She dressed quickly, gathered her things, and was out of the room before Brian opened his eyes. Brian woke alone. The memories came rushing back, vivid and disorienting. He sat up slowly and tried to reconstruct the sequence of events. He had been drugged, that much seemed certain. And yet he remembered the details clearly enough to know the picture was complicated. The woman had sensed something was wrong and had tried to leave. He had reached for her, asked her to stay. She had not consented clearly, but she had not pushed him away either. She planned this, he told himself. Asterisk, she followed me here. She wanted something from me. She used me, asterisk. He felt a cold anger settle in his chest. And beneath it, stubborn and unwelcome, something warmer that he refused to examine. He called his assistant and bodyguards into the room. Find that woman. They returned an hour later, empty-handed. She was gone, checked out and vanished without a trace. Brian instructed his assistant to request the security footage from the poolside and from the corridor outside his suite, then left his assistant's contact details with hotel security before boarding an emergency flight home. 3 days after Brian returned home, the hotel's security footage arrived. His assistant brought the files to him without comment and left the room. Brian sat alone at his desk and watched the recordings from start to finish. The poolside footage showed Melody arriving at the hotel 2 hours before Brian and Sylvia had sat down beside the water. It showed her speaking to a member of the housekeeping staff, a brief exchange accompanied by the passing of an envelope. It showed her being escorted toward the residential wing. The corridor footage was more damning still. It showed Melody entering Brian's suite with a key card she should not have possessed. It showed her leaving 20 minutes later, empty-handed. It showed Sylvia and Brian arriving at the suite door together, Sylvia visibly hesitant, Brian the one who turned back toward her. Brian sat with the footage for a long time. Everything he had told himself about Sylvia unraveled in the space of an hour. She had not orchestrated anything. She had been caught in the same trap he had, and she had tried to leave. He called his legal team immediately. Within 48 hours, the evidence had been passed to the authorities. A formal complaint was filed, unauthorized access to a private suite, procurement and use of a controlled substance, and intent to manipulate. Melody's lawyer contacted Brian's office within the week offering a quiet settlement. Brian refused it. She does not get to walk away from this, he told his lawyer flatly. Let it go through the courts. Melody was formally charged 2 weeks later. The case moved quickly given the weight of the footage and the testimony of the hotel staff members she had bribed. She was convicted and sentenced. The woman who had once stood beside Brian at charity galas and industry dinners was photographed leaving the courthouse in handcuffs, her face turned away from the cameras. Brian watched the news report that evening from his office and felt nothing he had not already processed. That chapter was closed. What occupied his mind now was something else entirely. He opened his laptop and began to search for everything he could find about Sylvia Bob and the Bob Group. Sylvia arrived home carrying the weight of 2 failures at once. She had not secured a partnership with Brian. She had, in fact, made the entire idea of approaching him again feel impossible. And while she had been away, the situation at the Bob Group had deteriorated further. Parties who had been watching the company's decline had deliberately moved to depress the stock further, buying up shares cheaply as the value fell. The company was now in a worse position than when she had taken over. Her father called. Anderson Bob did not raise his voice, which somehow made it worse. Sylvia went to see him and knelt on the floor of his study. Please honor your word, father. Give me the 2 weeks I have remaining. I am asking you. Anderson looked at his daughter for a long moment. He let her keep the 2 weeks. She returned to work with no clear plan and only the refusal to surrender. She arranged meetings with top executives across the city. One nearly drugged her. Others mocked her openly across restaurant tables, barely concealing their amusement at a woman in a desperate position. She left each meeting with less hope than she had arrived with. Then she secured an appointment with a CEO named Mr. Clifton. She arrived at the restaurant composed and prepared, with a proposal she genuinely believed in. Clifton listened politely, steepled his fingers, and then slid a document across the table. An agreement to purchase the Bob Group at a fraction of its actual worth. Sylvia looked at the document. She looked at Clifton's expression, that particular blend of sympathy and satisfaction that people wear when they believe they have already won. She picked up the document, folded it precisely in half, and set it back down in front of him. Thank you for your time, she said, and walked out. She sat in her car for a long while. The city moved around her indifferent. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and closed her eyes. Then she straightened up, started the engine, and drove back to the office. The day Anderson Bob had set to decide the fate of the company finally arrived. The boardroom filled steadily. Anderson sat at the head of the table. Donald was present, along with several shareholders and a group of potential buyers who had arrived with prepared offers and confident expressions. The atmosphere was the particular quiet of a room in which most people already believe the outcome is settled. Donald caught Sylvia's eye across the table and leaned forward slightly. All that confidence, he said, low enough to be directed only at her, and you couldn't do better than this. Sylvia held his gaze without blinking. You spent 2 years proving exactly how little you were capable of. All I did was refuse to match you. Anderson silenced them both with a single look. He reached for the sales document, uncapped his pen, and lowered it toward the page. The boardroom door opened. A man walked in wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, unhurried and immaculate. He surveyed the room without urgency, then spoke. I am here to partner with the Bob Group. It was Brian Edward. The room shifted. Several shareholders exchanged glances. The potential buyers straightened in their chairs. Donald stared. Sylvia looked at Brian and felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. She did not understand what he was doing. She did not understand why he was here, or what version of events had brought him through that door. She kept her expression completely still. Brian stepped forward and placed a document on the table in front of Anderson. Mrs. Sylvia and I had a prior agreement, he said with calm authority. I am here to honor it. Anderson picked up the document and read through it carefully. There were no predatory terms, no hidden conditions, no trap embedded in the language. He passed it to the shareholder on his left. It traveled around the table, each person reading in silence. One by one they signed. Brian Edward approved a $10 billion investment in the Bob Group. The potential buyers gathered their folders and left without making eye contact with anyone. After the room had emptied, Sylvia remained in her chair at the conference table. Brian sat down across from her. She looked at him for a moment, composing herself. Then she spoke. What exactly do you think you are doing? Isn't this the reason you followed me to YX country? Brian said. So you have decided I am a cheap woman who trades her body for business. Her voice was quiet and even. My brother destroys your relationship. And so you sleep with me and then ride in here as though that makes us square. What is your point, Mr. Bryan? What do you actually want? That is not. Because if this investment comes with the expectation that I owe you something, she continued, you can take your documents back. I will find another way. I have been finding other ways for 3 months. Sylvia, his voice was firm but not unkind. Will you please let me finish? She stopped. She folded her hands on the table and waited, her posture giving him nothing. I owe you an explanation and an apology, Bryan said. What happened in that hotel room was not your doing. It was not mine either. Melody followed me to Wyack's country. She accessed my suite and lit an aphrodisiac candle before either of us arrived. The hotel security footage confirmed everything. She has since been charged and convicted. I want you to know that I know you did nothing wrong. Sylvia said nothing. Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted. I blamed you at first, he admitted. I told myself you had planned the entire thing, that you were using me. I was wrong, and I am sorry for thinking it. That is a reasonable apology, Sylvia said carefully. I accept it, but it does not explain $10 billion invested in a company you were blacklisting a month ago. No, Bryan agreed. It does not. He leaned forward slightly. The truth is that I noticed you before any of this. On the plane, I wanted to ask you for that magazine. I could not stop thinking about the way you sat beside me at the pool that night, quietly, without asking anything from me. When I stood up and walked away, it was not because I was dismissing you. It was because I did not trust myself to speak without saying more than I intended. So I ran. He paused. I am not running now. Sylvia looked at him for a long time. Long enough that a lesser man might have filled the silence. Bryan did not. You are asking me to trust a man who assumed the worst of me, she said at last. A man I spent one evening sitting beside at a pool and one very complicated night with, neither of which happened under normal circumstances. You are asking me to call that the beginning of something. I am asking you to give it the chance to become something, Bryan said. I am not asking you to decide anything today. Sylvia was quiet again. She looked down at the table, then back at him. I do not make decisions about my personal life the same way I make decisions about business, she said. I will not be rushed, and I will not be charmed into skipping steps. If you are serious, you will earn it the slow way. I understand that, Bryan said. Good. She rose from her chair and collected her folder from the table. Then we will start with dinner. One dinner, no assumptions. After that, we will see. She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the frame. She looked back at him over her shoulder. And Mr. Bryan, do not be late. She walked out, and for the first time in months, she was smiling. Sylvia went to see her father that evening. The moment Anderson Bob saw her, he rose from his chair. He did not say anything for a moment. He simply held her by the shoulders and looked at her the way a man looks at someone he underestimated and will spend a long time making peace with. Then he pulled her into an embrace and held it. I am proud of you, he said. I should have said that a long time ago. Donald was in the room. He said nothing. He had no words left that were worth speaking. Within a week, he submitted his formal resignation from the Bob Group and cleared out his office on a Thursday morning while the building was quiet. 1 month after the boardroom, the company's numbers were unambiguous. Revenue was climbing. The partnership with Zenith Group had restored investor confidence, and the Bob Group was no longer a name spoken in pity. It was a name people wanted beside their own. Bryan arrived on time for every dinner. Sylvia made him work for it, as she had promised, asking sharp questions, watching how he behaved when things were inconvenient, noting the gap between what he said and what he did. The gap was small, smaller than she had expected. 3 months after the boardroom, On a quiet evening at a restaurant neither of them had chosen for its impressiveness, Sylvia looked across the table at Brian Edward and thought that she had been right to be careful. She had been right about a great many things. Yes, she said, in answer to the question he had asked. Brian smiled, a real one, unhurried, with nothing behind it except exactly what it appeared to be. Outside, the city carried on without them, indifferent and brilliant and entirely unaware that something worth something had just quietly begun.